It's time to wrap up my positional rankings for the 2014 NFL Draft. Thank God the draft is almost here. It's time to talk about the defensive prospects in this year's draft class. And of course, as with the other positions, you can look down below in the description box to see my positional rankings for the defensive backs. That's both corners and safeties all mashed together as one class. Now, as you look, the top 5 rated corners on my board in terms of players I project to play corner at the next level are Justin Gilbert, Jason Verrett, Kyle Fuller, Bradley Roby, and Keith McGill. Now, we start off with Justin Gilbert. There's some questions about whether he's a really physical player, but I know he does have the skills to be able to play both in man-to-man and zone. He has that kind of elite speed that you want out of a corner, and I also have to factor in, too, and I think sometimes people don't take this into consideration, his skills as a returner. And that weighs in a little bit to his overall gradings on the board, because not only can he have an impact as a corner right away, he can also have an impact for a team as a return specialist, and that's part of the reason why he's ranked as my #1 corner on the board. Jason Verrett from TCU, I think, is criminally underrated. I understand he's not the biggest guy, and I understand he has some durability concerns, especially with the shoulder injury, but this is a guy that when you watch him on film, he stands out. If Jason Verrett was 6 foot or 6'1", he very well could be a top 10 pick in this 2014 NFL draft, even with the shoulder concerns. That's how good this guy is. He's physical in run support. He's physical in both bump and run, man-to-man, in press coverage, in zone coverage. I just love Jason Verrett's game. I also love the game of Kyle Fuller. He surprised me. I thought he wasn't going to be as good, frankly, as what he was. I'm not always the biggest fan of Virginia Tech prospects, but Kyle Fuller I'm a very big fan of. A guy with the speed to be able to match up with quicker wide receivers at the NFL level, a guy with the size to be able to match up with the bigger, more physical wide receivers at the NFL level. Again, Kyle Fuller, a cornerback that I'm very, very high on, that I think is going to maybe surprise some people with how high he actually goes in the 2014 NFL draft. I think he might even be in play for my Chicago Bears at pick number 14. Bradley Roby from Ohio State is one of those real kind of confounding prospects in the sense that from a physical tool standpoint, he might be the best corner in the 2014 NFL draft, but he was very inconsistent in 2013, and you always wonder with him, is it going to be a tease? Are you going to see the physical tools? Are you going to see the potential and the ability? Or are you going to see that inconsistent, mediocre production and focus that you got out of him largely in 2013 under Urban Meyer, at Ohio State? And then Keith McGill from Utah. As teams start to look for those Richard Sherman type of bigger physical man-to-man cover corners, you look at a guy like Keith McGill, who's right around 6'3", about 210 pounds. That can be that physical guy on the outside. You're going to see him probably going round number 2 because, again, the NFL is a copycat league, period, and teams are going to look to copy the formula of the Seattle Seahawks, who feature what? Big physical outside corners, like a Richard Sherman, for example, and before Brandon Browner. So now you look at a Keith McGill, and he's a guy that I watched on film that I came away very impressed with. In terms of the safety class, the cornerback class is very good in this year's draft. I think you can find a lot of help all throughout the draft. The safety class, not so much. But the top safety on my board is Clinton Dix from Alabama. Even though I have some reservations about rating Alabama players really, really high based off of their recent track record in the NFL, maybe outside of Marcel Darius, I cannot lie that I still like a lot of what I see out of Dix on film. I think he's the real deal. Calvin Pryor from Louisville is a guy that I might project a little bit more as a strong safety at the NFL level as opposed to a free safety at this point in time, but he's a physical guy. He's got enough speed to be able to guard opposing slot receivers and tight ends, and he can make you pay when he makes contact, and he's also very good in run support. Jimmie Ward from NIU is a guy that kind of fits that versatile role of being able to play free safety, even if he's a tad bit undersized, but also being able to have that versatility to effectively cover slot receivers, which a lot of teams are starting to look at being more and more important out of their safeties for their defenses. Number 4, LaMarcus Joyner, a guy, when I talk about Jason Verrett, and I said if he was 6 foot or 6'1", he'd probably be a top 10 pick in this year's draft, even with the injury concerns. I look at a guy like LaMarcus Joyner, reminds me a little bit of Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, a Bob Sanders maybe perhaps, a poor man's version of Bob Sanders, a smaller guy, maybe 5'8", 5'9" at the very, very most, maybe 190 pounds. But again, packs a real wallop for that size that he does have, similar to a Jimmie Ward, and also has that versatility to be able to play center field, to come up and run support in the box, and also guard, opposing wide receivers out of the slot. I love LaMarcus Joyner. I think he's got a lot of game, and I think he could be an impact player like Tyrann Mathieu was for the Cardinals as a rookie in 2013. And then I look at Deone Bucannon from Washington State, a guy with size, about 6'1", 210, 215 pounds, with also the speed to be able to cover in center field and also cover opposing slot receivers, even though he may be better suited playing like Calvin Pryor, in my opinion, playing strong safety at the NFL level. He'd be a very athletic, strong safety at the NFL level. In terms of the prospects, there's a couple that really stand out to me as being overrated. One of them is Darqueze Dennard from Michigan State. I see what people might like about him, his size, his physicality, but I see a guy that is stiff in the hips. He has some injury concerns, especially the sports hernias that concern me quite greatly when you're talking about a position at cornerback where you have to have great hip movement. You have to have great hip turn. And I don't see that great hip turn in Darqueze Dennard, and maybe it comes from the sports hernias and some of these other injuries. And if he doesn't have that great hip turn, he's going to struggle to consistently be able to keep up with those fast, explosive wide receivers at the NFL level, not to mention the fact that because of that lack of hip turn that I see on film, I see a guy that's very grabby, very handsy, and is too physical, and will have a panache, I believe, in the NFL to be flagged a lot for defensive pass interference and defensive holding. So I look at him and I see people talk about him being the #1 corner, him being a first-round prospect. I look at him as like a round 2 to 3 prospect. I just don't see it out of him. And Stanley Jean-Baptiste, from Nebraska. Here's a guy that could probably go higher than he actually should. Somewhere probably in the early to mid portion of round 2 is where he may end up going. I saw Mike Mayock talk about he might be a guy that goes late in the first round. Shit, stranger things have happened. Mayock might indeed be true. But the people that see Stanley Jean-Baptiste and they see decent size in a 6'3", 215-pound package, they're going to sit there and see Richard Sherman. Well, the problem is Jean-Baptiste isn't very physical. You think he is because of his size, but when you watch the film, he really isn't. I've got him as like a mid-third round prospect, and I think he's going to be one that fans overrate because they're going to look at him and they're going to automatically envision him being somebody like, let's say, Richard Sherman. Well, there's only one Richard Sherman. You might say often imitated but never duplicated. Now, in terms of underrated prospects at the corner and safety position, one corner that stands out to me is Phillip Gaines of Rice. He's a guy, again, that kind of flies under the radar because he played for Rice, but he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got nice physicality. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty, so to speak, and run support. And he seems like a guy that could be able, with some good coaching, to really make a name for himself as a starting corner in the NFL. And then I look at the safety position. A guy I think that is criminally underrated is Brock Vereen from Minnesota. This is a guy that maybe his teammate Rashaad Hageman gets more attention on that Minnesota defense, but Brock Vereen, to me, is a stud. This guy is athletic. He can fly all over the place. He's great in center field. He's great, to me anyways, what I saw on film, being able to occasionally defend opposing slot receivers. He's solid in run support, and he makes plays all over the field. I think it's a shame that this guy's being viewed as a 4th or 5th round prospect, because I look at him as a guy in rounds 2 to 3, especially in a weak safety class, that could come in and be a free safety in the NFL level. A couple of sleepers that I want to talk about really quickly. One would be Jaylen Watkins from Florida, with the talk of Purifoy and in particular Marcus Roberson. The guy who might be the best NFL prospect out of the 3 and the best NFL player out of those 3 corners when all is said and done might be Jaylen Watkins. I think he presents more versatility. He could maybe play outside at corner. He could play in the slot. He could also line up for some teams at safety. Some teams might look at him in a weak safety class and envision themselves a smaller kind of free safety with the versatility, again, to be able to defend slot receivers. Anton Exum from Virginia Tech. I like Kyle Fuller, and I really like Anton Exum, and I think it's actually been surprising to me to see certain places ranking him as a 4th or a 5th or a 6th round pick. I'm like, this is the type of guy here with that type of size that at times showed an ability to shut down opposing wide receivers, like, let's say, a Kelvin Benjamin, for an example. This is a guy to me that really stands out and really could be one of those mid-round surprises that ends up being a 6 or 8 year starter in the NFL. And then I look at Ross Cockrell, from Duke, part of that very, very good Duke defense in 2013. That Duke team, that historically good Duke team for the Duke football program over David under David Cutcliffe. And I look at Ross Cockrell, and I saw a guy that made plays all over the field. He just seemed to have a nose for the football. It seemed like he did a good job with whatever wide receiver he was lined up against. He's a guy that I think, because he doesn't have elite size or he doesn't have elite speed and quickness, is just going to be underrated. But again, talking about productive college players and maybe lack one or two measurables, these are the perfect type of guys you take in rounds 4 or rounds 5 that come in and become special team contributors. They become solid backups, and some of them, like a Russ Cockrell, I believe, could potentially develop into starters at the NFL level. So again, check out down below my defensive back rankings for the 2014 NFL Draft. Still to come will be my overall big board for the 2014 NFL Draft and my finalized 2014 NFL Mock Draft. And make sure you check out the podcast Wednesday, May 7th at 10 p.m. Eastern. It'll be a 2014 NFL Draft Preview Edition. You will not want to miss it. It'll be a lot of fun.